Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. Thank you for sharing this busy news day with us. Elizabeth Warren faces an early 2020 campaign crisis. She listed her race as an American Indian when she registered to practice law in Texas more than 30 years ago. Plus, new CNN reporting and new CNN poll numbers this hour on Joe Biden in 2020. These things rarely end as they begin, but the early numbers may prove hard for the former vice president to ignore. And the State of the Union is still divided. The president's big speech did include a few bipartisan olive branches, but his tone on immigration, investigations, and the direction of the Democrats is driving the morning after debate.
We are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
And we begin the hour right there with the president's State of the Union. Bipartisan wishes overshadowed by partisan thumps. And on the biggest pressing question, no guarantees the government won't shut down again in just 10 days. The big annual stage is a chance for the president to offer us a roadmap. But look and listen for some clear direction on how to resolve the border wall dispute and avoid another government shutdown.
Now is the time for Congress to show the world that America is committed to ending illegal immigration. In the past, most of the people in this room voted for a wall. But the proper wall never got built. I will get it built. Simply put, walls work and walls save lives. So let's work together, compromise, and reach a deal that will truly make America safe.
Now, if you're an optimist, you did hear the president right there say the word compromise. But nowhere in the 82-minute speech did the president hint where or how he would budge off his wall demand. The top Democrat in the Senate today sounding sour on the odds of a deal to stave off a shutdown. And listen here, the vice president warning more stalemate could well be on the horizon.
Can you guarantee there will not be another government shutdown?
Well, I think our hope is that there's not, but I can't make that guarantee, Jeff.
CNN Sunland Safadi live on Capitol Hill. Sunland, on the day after, President offered what many don't see as a way out. Up there, the aides yesterday said hopeful negotiations might find a path forward. They still feel that way?
Well, the negotiators, John, are essentially trying in earnest to look the other way. They're trying to keep their heads down, keep hammering out a deal, keep trying to hammer out a deal, I should say, and essentially try not to let the president's rhetoric and his words derail them in any way. And the feeling up here on Capitol Hill between Democrats and Republicans, notably, is that the more that President Trump stays out of these negotiations, the better shot that they have at actually getting something. And that is in part why we've seen something of a different posture coming from many aides and negotiators up here on Capitol Hill. You have, at the time, President Trump kind of splashing cold water on the work of the conference committee. You have the negotiators saying something of rosy language, saying that they are indeed making progress, that they're inching potentially towards a deal, and basically giving us glimmers of hope that they could potentially broker a deal, potentially as soon as the end of this week. And the conference committee this morning, they are at this moment continuing to meet. They've been meeting for over 2 hours this morning. They had a classified briefing on the border wall. Of course, that is the thorniest issue. And Senator Durbin, emerging from that meeting just moments ago, the Democratic senator, was asked if anything he heard in that briefing leads him to believe that they're any closer to agreement. In one word, John, he just said no. So stay tuned as this all continues.
We'll see, and even if they do come up with a deal, then they've got to convince the president to sign it. But Sunland, appreciate the reporting live from the Hill. With me in studio to share their reporting and their insights, Julie Pace with the Associated Press, CNN's Jeff Zeleny, Tolu Olorunipa with Bloomberg, and Julie Hirschfeld-Davis with the New York Times. The big question in town this morning is, was there a hidden clue there as how to get out of this? And I guess the bigger question is, was this a 2019 governing speech or a 2020 campaign marker?
It was a 2020 launch. He's seeing all these other Democrats do it, so that's exactly what he was doing in the House chamber. it was clear by immigration, obviously, but the socialism language and other things. He was, I think, trying to get Republicans back on his side into the idea of he is their standard bearer. It is his party. So the speech was a lot of different things, but it was centrally, to my ear at least, and to a lot of people I talked to after the speech, the opening bell for his re-election campaign.
I think Jeff's right on one important point there, that a lot of what Trump was trying to do was actually shore up some of his support among Republicans.
Right.
You know, he has the support of Republican voters writ large, but there has been some signs of weakening among his support among Republicans on Capitol Hill, in part because the shutdown went so poorly for them. And what I think was interesting about his rhetoric around immigration, the border wall, and the possibility of a future shutdown is that, well, he was very clear he wants to build this wall. He sees that as a central promise. He didn't mention his pledge to use an emergency declaration if Congress doesn't give him a deal, and he didn't use the wall as an ultimatum. He said he would build it, but there was no bright line on what he would or would not sign.
I thought what he did not say about immigration and the wall was as interesting as what he did, because as Sunland said, I think this conference committee really is hoping that the president will stay quiet, will stay on the sidelines, will let them broker this deal if there's a deal to be brokered. And the fact that he didn't try to put some more meat on the bones of what that compromise would look like, and he didn't make an ultimatum, and he did use the word compromise, at least leaves them the space to potentially reach that deal. But there's still the overriding question, which he didn't do one thing to answer last night, about whether he will ultimately be able to accept that deal when they present it to him, if they're even able to get there inside the room.
Yeah, will he back down? Which is why you hear the negotiators, normally in Washington, the deadline is a week from Friday. Normally in Washington, that means they would go till a week from Friday, probably until the sun was starting to set. That's normally the way they work. Maybe if they have a late flight, they try to get done early afternoon. But there's some talk of trying to get it done this Friday. The reason for that being in part, give the president some time to think it over, to see what happens, to avoid another crisis at the end. Listen to the top two Democrats today saying, we hope, Mr. President, you'll A, give us a chance to finish this, and then B, maybe listen, sign it.
Left to their own devices, I think they can have an agreement on time by Friday.
You heard his speech. You said, uh-oh. But if the president stays out of it, I am confident that the Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, can come up with an agreement.
How confident are you that the president can stay out of it?
I don't know. I mean, he can't help himself.
I mean, normally that would be a ridiculous question, actually. He's the president. He ran on this issue. He has every right to be part of it. But even Republicans would tell you they don't disagree with all the policy of Pelosi and Schumer. But even the Republicans would tell you the problem with the president is he's so inconsistent. When he gets involved, sends things off the rails.
Yeah, that's why we had a government shutdown in the first place for 35 days, because there was a deal on the table that Democrats and Republicans supported, but the president decided at the last minute that he was not okay with that deal. So that's why these Democrats and Republicans who are sort of hanging out behind closed doors trying to hash out a deal, they realize that they can get something that they can both take to their parties and they can get support for and avoid a government shutdown. The big question is whether or not President Trump would sign on to that, and that is something that not only Democrats have no idea about, but even Republicans who talk to the president regularly do not know what his bottom line is, what he would ultimately decide if they come up with a deal. So that's a big challenge that Republicans are facing, not knowing the bottom line for the president and whether or not he would just either veto a bipartisan deal or just go ahead and sign a emergency declaration and do this without Congress.
And you learn, if you go through the speech, if you watch last night, or if you read the transcript of what animates the president. A couple lines on infrastructure, 3 pages on immigration. He did say, to the Democrats, let's work together on things like HIV/AIDS. Let's work together on things like childhood cancer. Democrats were skeptical about the financial commitment to those issues, but he did have some olive branches to reach out in areas where there is bipartisan agreement. But then he also said, you want to get along, you want the economy to continue, essentially call off the investigative dogs.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations.
The Democrats would say constitutional congressional oversight.
Well, and he can say whatever he wants about that, but Democrats are moving forward with oversight starting today, and that's going to be his new reality. I think what he's trying to do there is essentially do the same thing to these congressional investigations that he's tried to do to the Mueller investigation, which is to try to undermine its credibility, try to make it look like it's nothing but politically motivated, so that no matter what comes out from this, he can hope that his supporters will just look at it as another Democratic witch hunt. But those investigations are going to go forward and are going to be a real central part of his presidency over the next 2 years. voters.
I think the other thing he's trying to do there is set the table for the argument. And he, if he's listening to his advisors, which he sometimes does not, but he obviously realizes that with the Democrats in control of the House, the likelihood of any big, substantial legislative accomplishments between now and the time that he's going back to voters and asking to be reelected is pretty low. And so he wants it out there as an idea that the reason that nothing got done, the reason that you're seeing, less accomplishments than I promised you would have, is because they're busy investigating me. And he really wants to set up that opposition now so that the thought is in voters' minds when he has to go back and explain why there hasn't been more done in his first term.
It's going to be fascinating to watch the next week to 10 days here in Washington as the negotiations continue, and then see, will there be follow-up? The president has laid out some of these ideas to work together before. Hasn't been much follow-up. Most people think this is going to be more partisan to the campaign marker. We shall see. It's a fascinating speech. Up next for us, some breaking news in Virginia. The governor and lieutenant governor's problems weren't enough. Now the state's attorney general coming clean himself about a blackface incident in his past. More dramatic breaking news today in Virginia's capital, where the number 2 and number 3 state officials are now engulfed in political firestorms alongside the state's governor. The state's lieutenant governor, Justin Fairfax, changing his tone after being accused of sexual assault by a woman in 2004. He now says women deserve to be heard and says it's essential that survivors of sexual assault tell their stories. He is, though, maintaining that his encounter with the woman 15 years ago was consensual, and he says he has absolutely nothing to hide. Meanwhile, as that plays out, the state's attorney general, Mark Herring, revealing that he, like the state's governor, appeared in blackface while in college. In a statement released just moments ago, Democrat Herring writes, in 1980, when I was a 19-year-old undergraduate in college, some friends suggested we attend a party dressed like rappers we listened to at the time. We dressed up and put on wigs and brown makeup. This was a one-time occurrence, and I accept full responsibility for my conduct. It was really a minimization of both people of color and a minimization of a horrific history I knew well even then. He goes on to say he's deeply sorry for the pain he is now causing with this revelation. CNN's Ryan Nobles is following these developments. He joins us live. Ryan, as if there wasn't enough, what now?
Yeah, John, this is unbelievable. We had first heard a rumor about this potential situation with blackface regarding the Attorney General yesterday morning and have been chasing it for the last 24 hours. The Attorney General just releasing a dramatic statement where he admits to being at a party dressed as a rapper in brown makeup. Now, we also know that the Attorney General, in an attempt to try and stave off the criticism that may come to this, did meet with the Legislative Black Caucus to inform them of this situation. And of course, this comes after the backdrop of 2 other scandals that are rocking Virginia's capital with the 2 other statewide elected officials. The Lieutenant Governor, Justin Fairfax, as you mentioned, is facing accusations of a sexual assault charge that go back to 2004. And of course, the governor, Ralph Northam, facing accusations or the release of a photo that appeared in his medical school yearbook, which shows someone in blackface and another person in a KKK outfit. The governor says he's not one of those people in the photo, but it did appear on his medical school yearbook. Now, the problem with all of this, John, is that all 3 men have yet to say that they're going anywhere, despite calls for resignation from the governor, a lot of heat put on the lieutenant governor, and now this new emerging situation with the attorney general. Basically, the entire state capitol is in a state of chaos. But just to quickly pivot back to how the lieutenant governor is handling all of this, we know that over the past couple of days, behind closed doors, the lieutenant governor has been forcefully encouraging Democratic leaders here to stay by his side. In fact, we know that he went into an expletive-laden rant attacking his accusers about this current situation. That could be part of the reason why you see him softening his tone right now with a new statement saying that we need to hear from the accusers and have this process play out. The sum total of all this, John, is that there is a good chance that despite all 3 of these huge scandals, that nobody here leaves their current office and they all stay in power for the balance of their term. John?
Wow. Okay, Ryan Nobles, new questions today. Remarkable. People dug in. Appreciate it, Ryan. Come back to us if there's any other developments. It is stunning in the sense that you have had top Democrats. I don't mean leave the Republicans out to be disrespectful of the Republicans, but this is a Democratic problem at the moment. You have a Democratic governor, Democratic lieutenant governor, now Democratic attorney general, the top 3 officials constitutionally in the state, all dealing with these problems. The calls for the governor to resign still stand. Questions about the lieutenant governor are on the table. He's trying to clear those up. Now you have the attorney general, where people the other day were saying, well, if this is really a doozy and we have to lose the governor and the lieutenant governor, we have the attorney general. Number 4 would be the Republican House Speaker of the state of Virginia. So the politics of that, this will be a conversation about politics and principle, but the politics of that will tell you the Democrats are going to dig in, right?
Well,
no question. And I think
doing now,
it does. And I think their silence is a little surprising in some respects, because they, of course, were very loud and vocal, Democrats were, about the Kavanaugh situation, slightly quieter about the lieutenant governor here. So we'll see how their reaction to the attorney general's thing is. But, the only thing that quiets people more here, usually in Washington politics, is when they're worried about someone from the other side winning over here. So this is developing. The reason it matters nationally, the reason this is an important thing, Virginia is a key state, but it also is a moment of, is one party going to be hypocritical or not here? So I think that's why we're watching this. And we still have not heard from a lot of leaders in the Democratic Party, including former President Barack Obama.
And the standard laid out by the top Democrats in Virginia, echoed by a lot of the top Democrats in Washington, including Democrats running for president, is, okay, you might be a good person. You may have been a good person the last 25 years of your life. It's just inexcusable. It's inexcusable. It's insensitive. It's reprehensible. You cannot be in a position of leadership if you did this in your 20s, in the case of the governor. The Attorney General says he was 19. How do they move that standard? They laid it out pretty clearly over the weekend.
It's zero tolerance from Democrats. And the big reason that they feel like it has to be zero tolerance is because they want clean hands if they're going to be targeting President Trump on either issues of race or some kind of sexual misconduct. And so they feel like they have to be pretty pure on this issue. All the national Democrats are aligned. But I mean, to the point Ryan made there at the end, that is pretty unbelievable to think that all 3 of these men think that they are going to stay in their jobs. How, even if they do that, how productive can they be in their jobs going forward? What would essentially be the point of them staying in right now?
And in a year where it's less relevant to our national audience, but in the state of Virginia, there are legislative elections in which the Democrats think they can flip a chamber, and they continue a path where Virginia a decade ago was a red state. It moved to a purple state. Now it's considered a pretty blue state, although it's still, you mentioned, still in play. So you have the governor, who acknowledges appearing in blackface, mimicking Michael Jackson. Now you have the attorney general acknowledging appearing in blackface, mimicking a rapper, going to a party. And then you have the lieutenant governor, who is accused. He changed his statement. He did lash out. He was quite emotional the other day, suggesting other political opponents were leaking this information, questioning why his accuser was coming forward again, because she came forward during one of the campaigns, talked to the Washington Post. They could not corroborate, so there was no story. Today's statement seems to try to take a step back to a calmer place, if that's the right word. While this allegation has been both surprising and hurtful, I also recognize that no one makes charges of this kind lightly, and I take it in this situation very seriously. I would like to encourage the media, my supporters, and others to treat both the woman who made this allegation and my family with respect. I wish her no harm or humiliation, nor do I seek to denigrate her or diminish her voice. But I cannot agree with a description of events that I know is not true. That is a much more calmer place than the lieutenant governor was 72 hours or so ago.
Absolutely, and it's also at odds from what some of the reporting is about how he has responded to this privately, and it speaks to what the reaction to that may have been, and the fact that as Ryan said, that it appears, if you read that statement, that he thinks that it's possible that if he tiptoes back and sort of makes a more conciliatory statement, he might actually be able to hang on to his job. The thing that is amazing here is that this is all unfolding in Virginia, which of course was the site of the marches in Charlottesville, which got President Trump into so much hot water in his first year in office when he made statements that were seen as insufficiently condemning white supremacy, neo-Nazis, and now you have a bunch of a couple of Democratic elected officials who are admitting to having appeared in blackface. After the outrage that was expressed by about President Trump's behavior, it's really hard for Democrats to go back and say that this is, any better, somehow different. They're obviously in lower positions, but this is a state where the history of racism and these issues is just, woven into the fabric, and it's a very painful thing. And it's just stunning to believe that you could have 2 officials that high up who would actually think that they're in a position to hang on to their jobs there,
and in a position
under these circumstances,
to think that they should not have done something to get out ahead of this. Right. Just the arrogance of that. The arrogance of that it happened. You saw Charlottesville. You see the national debate. You see the national debate in your party. You see the state debate in your state, and you don't raise your hand and say, "It's something I need to talk to you about." That the part is what makes the arrogance of it, makes it stunning. Up next for us, days ahead of her anticipated 2020 announcement, Elizabeth Warren hoped her DNA debacle and apologies were in the past until this came along.
This is CNN Breaking News.
New wrinkles today on the controversy Senator Elizabeth Warren just can't seem to shake. The Massachusetts Democrat now facing new questions about why she claimed Native American heritage, this time on an official state document. CNN's MJ Lee is here with the details of this developing story that comes, you see the document right there, comes just as Elizabeth Warren is prepared to announce her campaign, formally announced for president. MJ, the senator has taken steps to try to put this in the past. It won't go away.
That's right. This is a problem that is not going away for Elizabeth Warren. And John, the reason that this Washington Post reporting is significant is because we now have a visual. Elizabeth Warren writing in her own words, in her own handwriting, describing her race as American Indian. So this is not just a checked box, and this is appears to be an example of Warren herself explicitly describing her race as American Indian, regardless of how long ago this happened. And I should note that a Warren aide was pointing out to CNN that this was not a part of her state bar application, but rather a form that she filled out after she was already admitted to the bar. An obviously important distinction, but I'm not sure, frankly, that this is going to be a distinction that people and voters necessarily understand or care about, particularly those who are already going to be looking at Elizabeth Warren in an unfavorable way for whatever reason. I also wanted to read a statement that we got from Elizabeth Warren's spokesperson. It reads, Senator Warren has said she is not a citizen of any tribe and only tribes determine tribal citizenship. She is sorry that she was not more mindful of this earlier in her career. Now, John, how much are voters going to care about this? It's obviously very, very early on in the cycle, so this is an open question. But just anecdotally, we know that Elizabeth Warren has taken dozens of questions since she announced her exploratory campaign on New Year's Eve. And by my count, she has been asked this question exactly 2 times. So make of that what you will. But obviously, the timing of this is not great, given that she's going to formally announce her campaign on Saturday. John.
And we'll see how it plays out. MJ Lee, appreciate the reporting there. Let's bring it in the room. To MJ's point, the question is, President Trump cares about this. He has several times taken her on Twitter in the past. Many people think the reason she had a DNA test, which then the rollout of that was a mess for Elizabeth Warren, was to somehow try to quiet the president. It did not work. I just want to show here, these are just times Senator Warren identified herself or was identified as a Native American. A local Oklahoma cookbook called Pow Wow Chow. That's what it's called. That's what it's called. Back in 1984. Sorry to even have to say that. The Association of American Law Schools directory from 1986 to 1995. She notified officials at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard following her hiring. The DNA test that came out last year. This has come out. The question is, what is the impact on the campaign? We'll talk more about this poll in the next segment, but we have brand new poll numbers out today. And if you look at them, Elizabeth Warren is viewed very favorably by Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters. 52% view her favorably. These are the candidates who have announced they're running for president: Warren, Harris, Castro, Gillibrand, Buttigieg, and Tulsi Gabbard. She's viewed most favorably there. But when you ask Democrats what's the most important factor in picking a nominee, they talk about a good chance of beating Trump. So will this hurt that argument? If electability is the defining issue for Democrats, will this hurt her candidacy?
This has already sort of caused her to make a number of stumbles in the early stages of her candidacy. She's tried to put out the DNA test. That sort of ended up being a flop. She's talked about saying that I'm not a person of color. That ended up not being enough because now we're seeing new documents that show that she did claim that she was a Native American back when she was, at the Texas bar. And I think that's one of the reasons why this issue is dogging her campaign, is because there's so many different iterations of this problem. She hasn't been able to put it behind her because new documents come out, new different strategies come out, and they're not working. I think she needs to put this behind her, and she hasn't been able to.
It raises the question, are you ready for prime time? I was talking to a number of Democratic strategists yesterday. She just ran for re-election in Massachusetts last year. If you had to deal with stuff like this, and she tried to deal with it in that campaign, but deal with it fully and completely. If you know this is an issue, call your staff in. Where was I registered for the bar? Where did I ever bring in a suit? Where did I ever sign a piece of paper? And you do it yourself. This is the same conversation we just had about Virginia. If you have a problem, there's a way to get out ahead of it. The fact that she did the DNA test, and she apologized to the Cherokee Nation, then you get this reporting, this document unearthed by the Washington Post. That has a lot of campaign strategists wondering, what else?
Well, because the DNA test was the attempt to get out ahead of it, and it was so botched. I mean, sort of 101 in that situation should have been to go to the Cherokee Nation and say, hey, if I were to do this, what would you think about that? What would your reaction be? I think the reality for her is this is not going to go away. So whether it's more revelations or whether it's President Trump keeping it in the spotlight, this is something that she's going to be dealing with throughout the course of her campaign. The question is, and I don't think we know the answer right now, is what do voters take away from this? Do they look at this and say,
Right, that was supposed to doom his candidacy. It didn't. So we don't know how voters react to it, but how she reacts to it is...
Didn't do his candidacy, but he did have to give a big speech on it. The candidate had to write the ship.
So
the candidate had to write the ship.
She'll have
so
to do something, and we'll see how she handles
it. Do it in this case. Up next, our new CNN poll. We'll get much more into it. Shows who Democrats are most likely to support come 2020. Some new reporting today on Joe Biden's 2020 timeline and some new poll numbers that could help him work through any last-minute doubts. Let's get to the numbers first and take a peek. In our new CNN SSRS poll, we asked, who are you very or somewhat likely to support for president in 2020? This is not a horse race. We're not asking voters this candidate versus that candidate. It's who do you like, who could you see yourself supporting, who are you likely to support? Well, Joe Biden comes out on top, ahead of President Trump. Thinking about running for president? You're going to think that's pretty good, right? Bernie Sanders does pretty well here. Kamala Harris, she can say she's moving up. Her rollout, all the national attention. Just talked about Elizabeth Warren. This poll taken obviously before the latest controversy, but she also rises up pretty high. This is a who are people thinking about. Don't take this as who are they going to vote for, but who they think they're likely to support for president. If you're Joe Biden and you're making your final decision, you like that. You're the only guy ahead of Trump in this poll. What's the most important? As Democrats choose a nominee, a good chance to beat Trump comes in first. Has the right experience second. Willing to work with the GOP comes in third. Again, if you're Joe Biden, 1, 2, and 3, you think that describes me making that final decision. Races don't always end as they begin, but if you're Joe Biden, look at the beginning. Those are pretty good numbers for you in our new poll. Now, this is just Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents. Who are you very likely to support? And again, you'll notice this adds up to way more than 100. This is not a horse race poll, this candidate versus that candidate. It's who are you warm toward? Who could you very likely to support? Joe Biden still leads the pack. Again, if you're Senator Harris, you think you're moving up. You're encouraged by that. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker round out the top 5 there. But again, Joe Biden making his decision says, I would start as the front runner. Here's the bottom of the pack here. Beto O'Rourke, still not sure if he's going to run, although told Oprah yesterday, probably. You see here, if you're Michael Bloomberg or Sherrod Brown, you think, okay, I got some work to do among Democratic voters, especially if you look at not at all likely to support. Mayor Bloomberg, 30% of Democrats there. That's a problem for him as he tries to say, I was a Republican, I was an independent, now I want to be a Democrat. Beto O'Rourke also, I showed you the plus side. There's a negative there. So as we watch this play out, we see this all plays out. One thing we do know, one name not there, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Is she going to run? Tune in Sunday.
Sunday, come to Boom Island in Minneapolis, as in Boom Island, drop the mic, and then you'll find out.
You are going to announce your decision.
I am. We've had so many discussions about this, so I thought, well, here you go. Well, that's the moment.
Senator Klobuchar on Sunday. We'll come back to that in a minute. You've been working your Biden sources, and the answer is?
His orbit and world is still preparing for the likelihood that he'll run. He still has not made a final decision yet. So that is always the open question here with Joe Biden. But I'm told they are likely eyeing a date at the end of next month, the end of the first quarter or the very beginning of April, so he doesn't get caught up in how much money did you raise in the first quarter, because that's what's going to be happening here. But everyone in his orbit is preparing for him to run. He's looking at polling, and he believes that there is more of a lane for him. I'm guessing this poll will certainly heighten that argument. But again, it has to be his decision, and I'm told he's not quite there yet.
The question is, how do you read the data? Because if you look at the history of campaigns, they very rarely end as they begin. Right. So if you're Biden, you're the horse, you're ahead of the track, you're around the first curve. Can you count on that to last?
You generally don't want to be the front runner at this point. I mean, one of the other takeaways, though, from there, and this is interesting because Joe Biden's argument, if he does go forward, and this is largely going to be, I'm the only one who can beat Trump. I think if you look at a lot of the polling, including this new one, there are a lot of candidates who voters think could beat Trump. So I'm not sure that message, I'm the only one who can do this, is necessarily going to resonate with Democratic primary voters.
Well, and the other thing that was really interesting about the results of that poll is that, you had about, I think it was 26% said, the most important thing was who can beat Trump. You had 30% who said none of the things that were on that list. We don't know yet. And I'm not sure that Democratic base really knows what it is that they're quite looking for in a presidential candidate. I think because Biden was vice president, he's very well known. He has all that name recognition. People are familiar with him. They associate him with the Obama presidency. Perhaps, nostalgia for that. under President Trump is pushing people toward him. But we don't know what that other 30% is, and that's a really important question, and Joe Biden doesn't know that either. And so I think that's probably one of the things he's weighing now is, would that actually be the winning, lane for him to be in?
And so one of the candidates we're waiting for, Senator Klobuchar, Midwestern voice. Most people expect her to get in, but we'll see what happens Sunday when she makes her decision in Minnesota. Another candidate is Beto O'Rourke, who did his drive after he lost the Texas Senate race, did some Medium posting. Some people loved him. Some people thought, what is this all about? Sat down with Oprah yesterday, dropped a hint. Oh, I'm sorry here. I thought we had sound. We want to play as great a role as possible in making sure this country lives up to our expectations, to the promise, to the potential that we all know her to have. I've been thinking about running for president. I've got to tell you, and you can tell I'm so excited at the prospect of being able to play that role. None of us has the luxury of sitting any of this out. That tells me he's running.
He definitely sounds like a potential candidate. It was interesting to look through the poll and see that at his numbers, he was sort of just second to Mayor Bloomberg in the number of Democrats who said they definitely would not support him. So there is sort of some residual opposition to Mr. O'Rourke, maybe because of his sort of dilly-dallying about whether to jump into the race, his road trip. I think that turned a lot of people off. But he is someone who a lot of people are watching and waiting to see whether or not he jumps into the race. That could also impact other folks like Biden. It could also impact Senator Sanders, who's thinking about a run as well. So there are a number of people who are on the sidelines right now who could really shake up the polling and shape up the race if they decide to jump in. And right now, because the race is so wide open, it looks like more people are looking like they're more likely to run and more likely to jump in than not. And sort of at this point, why not?
It's funny, expectations may have lowered a little bit for him as we've gone on here. So that could be a good thing for someone who's new on the national stage, needs to introduce himself. But he also said his family still isn't there yet. He was very specific in that interview, which Oprah, that his son Ulysses, his oldest son, doesn't want him to do it. So he left open the possibilities. Not. As for Senator Klobuchar, if you know Minneapolis, the Boom Island Park she's talking about, the backdrop of that is the I-35 interstate and the bridge, which collapsed. It was a major tragedy there, and she, with the Republican senator, with the Obama administration, worked to get that rebuilt. So maybe a coincidence, perhaps not, that that's where she is making her announcement. Huh? A sign that she can get things done.
This field's going to get crowded, more crowded, more crowded. Up next, 2020 hopeful Cory Booker pulls no punches. While questioning a key judicial nominee, his conservative critics say he went too far.
This is CNN Breaking News.